Okay, so I'll give everyone a little bit of background on my relationship to Elena. I first met her because I was writing a story about hip hop and fashion, and Elena's a fashion reporter and amongst many other things. And I used her as a source, and she gave me a lot of advice about my career as a journalist. I'm graduating, so I want to learn more about the industry and working in soft news and being a woman of color in the industry and all that. So I really was inspired by Elena and her story and all her advice, and I thought it'd be great for a lot of us to hear more about her story because we have a lot of students with similar passions and career goals. So Elena, if you
I
want,
invited you into my classroom and you spoke to my students. So
yeah, I went to FIT also and spoke about the little stuff I know about interviewing. And I think it would be the great experiences for us at Stony Brook to have the same experience. So you can give a little bit more about your background, and I think some people will have questions for you.
Sure. I'll try not to do too much talking about me because that's what Google is for. I am, one of the first people in my family to go to college. And I think that's really, really important because, throughout my life experience, I've had to do quite a bit of navigating and figuring things out. And all those are great skills to have as journalists. I'm from Sunset Park, Brooklyn, which ironically is the same neighborhood where the shooting took place earlier this morning. And that is the R train and the RN train are two popular trains that run along that neighborhood. And that particular train station is one that's very frequented. And it was at the height of, morning commute for workers and students. I'm born and raised in Sunset Park. My parents are originally from Puerto Rico. My mom came to the US as an infant. She was about 9 months old when my grandmother relocated from Puerto Rico to Spanish Harlem. My father, on the other hand, came here as an adult in his mid-20s. And my parents' love story begins on the dance floor of a nightclub called Club Broadway, and the rest is history. My mom was 19, dad 23. Those numbers are probably not heard of for marriage, but they got married very young. And about 2 years later, I came along. And I would say the aha moment in terms of career and career path for me happened in middle school. I think like most kids growing up, you have all these wants and desires about what you want to be when you grow up. And I loved animals. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, but the idea of going to school for 8 years to take care of a pet didn't quite fascinate me. I've always loved architecture and art, but I've always felt that I had a deficiency where I can only draw what's in front of me. I couldn't draw from what was inside my head. And then in middle school, my English teacher had pointed out that I had, I guess, strong reading and writing skills. And she asked me to join the yearbook. And I ended up getting a journalism award upon graduation. And that for me was the aha moment, right? I have to speak the teacher's name. Mrs. Carver was the one who kind of brought that out. So I went to high school in Brooklyn, a specialized high school called Midwood High School, right across the street from Brooklyn College. And I took a journalism class in high school, but I wasn't good enough to make the school paper. But again, speaking and thinking about, the things that I've spoken to my English teacher before, I was like, well, maybe I'm just not cut out for print. And so at that point, I decided that I was going to pursue a career in broadcasting. So ironically, I didn't go to the school that I wanted to go to. I had my eyes set on, I only applied to 2 colleges. I got into both. I wanted to go away. My parents didn't want me to go away, but it really boiled down to the financial aid package. And so I had gotten accepted to Syracuse, which was my first choice. And I applied to NYU because that's where my father had, for whatever reason, dreamed up that I should go to. And NYU gave me the better package. I was a HEOP student. HEOP stands for the Higher Education Opportunity Program. In the SUNY system, it's called EOP, or Equal Opportunity Program. Similar, the HEOP is in private schools, EOP is in SUNY schools. And nonetheless, what that meant was that I was, fairly intelligent, maybe not above average, but could make the grade in terms of schooling, but didn't have the financial means. And so that really helped me to be able to afford to go to a school like NYU. And I built wonderful relationships through that program, friends and colleagues that I'm still, connected to this day. So I had every intent in being a television reporter, and then my television professor also was a radio professor, took radio, fell in love with that. I started internships my junior year. I kind of followed all the things that they told us to do that would land us the job at the end of college. And I interned. The first place I entered, actually, I did 2 radio internships at the same time. I was a production assistant for the Amy Goodman. Back then, she worked on a show called On the Media at WNYC AM radio. And I also did community reporting at WBAI FM radio. So I was really fortunate to really understand reporting from a community aspect, from a diversity perspective, and to understand the importance of journalism really from these 2 different media points. At WBAI, I worked under the leadership of the late Jose Santiago. He was the first Latino journalist that I had encountered. And he, had me cover protests. I got to meet Latino activists, the commission hearings, I would go to. So he put me really out there in terms of a wide variety of stories and had me really understand the issues behind the headlines. On the other hand, at WNYC, I learned more about show production, researching. I used to screen the callers, which was really interesting, and come up with story ideas. So really, they were a wonderful complement to each other. And then I also interned at WCBS TV, and I had the pleasure of working on the investigative unit under Mike Taibbi, who was the reporter, and Rose Arce, who was the producer, who was also a reporter at Newsday. And I was like starstruck. I'm going, man, she won a Pulitzer Prize in her 20s. So I was just in awe of, this fabulous team. And I think it was Mike Taibbi that really kind of made me understand that as serious as this business is, you have to have fun. So we would go do a story at, let's say, Coney Island Hospital, and it would be a story about, I don't know, like hospital fraud. And then he was like, you always got to have fun. So we would take a break and have lunch in Coney Island and shoot hoops. He would do stuff like that. And I'm going, wow, this is an interesting job, right? You have downtime when this is serious work. And he always made it a point that you had to take time out, from the heavy work. And so I had all the, internship experience. And when I graduated, no job. And not surprising, and a lot of college debt. I went to NYU, and even though I was a HEAP student, I still took out loans. And so I started off first looking specifically for a reporting job. And then when that didn't seem to pan out, then I said, well, I'm going to, and I had been promised a desk assistant job at CBS that just never materialized. But because I was extremely persistent and I held people accountable, they were like, all right, well, we don't have anything now anymore, but would you take a sales assistant job at BlackRock? And I said, absolutely. All right, I'm not going to take no for an answer. You promised me a job, and a job I shall have. So I ended up doing sales assistant position for 2 years, completely gave up on the idea of journalism because I had bills to pay. I now had to pay college loans. Around that time, some friends of mine from college started a Latino magazine called Urban Latino. And this is very important because in publishing, there had not been at that moment in time an English dominant magazine catering to my generation. And this is before Latina magazine came out. And so that's where I started getting print clips because I had never taken a print journalism course. I was focused on broadcasting. And so I did some freelance writing there. And I ended up getting my first reporting job in 1996, so 2 years after I graduated college. And I got a job in, back then, the publishing company that owned the publications was Fairchild Publications. And I worked for now defunct DNR, which stood for Daily News Record. in my academic training, and I think it was just an oversight, my professors never spoke about trade publications. And so I'm always very mindful to talk about all aspects of publishing, because that was a wonderful training ground for me. And so I literally went from being a fashion enthusiast to a fashion expert overnight. And my editors were great. I had a test, and they literally made up a story on the spot. Each of them played a different role in fashion. One was a president, one was a designer, another person I think was like a financial person. And at the time, they made up a men's pantyhose company. And I had to write a news brief. And literally from that experience, wrote it on the spot. I was very serious, tape recorder, notebook, did all the things I was supposed to. And that's how I landed the job. The job was going to be temporary. I got the job through a diversity program called MAP. And so the job was supposed to be a 1-year position, and then ended up turning out to be 7. And in that course of time, I covered several beats in fashion. I covered men's slacks, outerwear, and a category called young men's. Young men's was something I was more familiar with because the brands on my resource list were brands that I recognized, except I felt they were outdated. They were brands that to me in their heyday was the 80s in my childhood, and were not necessarily the brands that young people were wearing at that moment. And this is 1996, a pinnacle year, especially with the explosion of hip hop becoming mainstream and the fashion now moving from, a local New York TV programming to, international exposure. So I got calls from a lot of designers from that market who said no one had ever seen their brands or gone to their showroom. And I explained that I couldn't explain why people did not go to their showrooms or write about them, but I was starting on a clean slate, and I made sure I went into every showroom and I returned every call. And that was the start of my career. My career grew parallel to the market I covered. It was literally in its inception and explosion at the very same time. And the brands that I'm speaking of are brands at that time like Mecca USA, Fubu, Wu Wear, which was the fashion brand of Wu-Tang Clan. And within 3 months of my job, I got my first page 1 story. And my page 1 story was about how hip hop was becoming mainstream. And I was so nervous about pitching that story that I actually did a proposal to my editors, because I realized that this was not the type of story that had ever really been in my publication, or at least not anything recent. I looked at some archives. They hadn't covered the market in years, and they did it as more of a fashion shoot than an actual story. So I was very careful. And I was very conscious that I was brought on staff because I was the diversity card. I was Latina, I was young, and I didn't want to be pigeonholed and thought of, well, then she could do those stories and those stories only. But you can't really run away from where the voids are in the marketplace. And for me, being a journalist in part was because I never saw my reflection on the screen and the stories and narratives that I thought were important. I didn't understand, well, who gets to define what's newsworthy? And why is it that I only see certain kind of stories and I don't see people that look like me on camera, except on Spanish news, and that's a whole different market. So little by little, I was breaking stories to the point where it became daily coverage. That daily coverage allowed me to have my own column. I created my own supplement. I ended up working for Women's Wear, covering the juniors market as a result of all that. And then I kind of hit a glass ceiling. I got promoted and moved up, and then I hit a glass ceiling. And then I eventually went back to school. I realized that I wanted to publish a book on this topic. I didn't really know how to break into the business. And around 2002, about 6 months after 9/11, I had gotten laid off and I had to reinvent myself. And I went from being the person sitting on the front row of fashion shows to my phone's not ringing. So in part of that reinvention, I went back to school and I did my master's in publishing. I worked on my book proposal, went through agents, nobody bit the idea. So the book that would publish in 2012 was an idea that I had in 2002. So it took 10 years for the idea to actually materialize. And, I felt to some degree, my ego was a bit bruised. I had all these friends who wrote books that I thought didn't have substance or value to society, horoscope books, light, fun stuff. And I'm going, I feel like I have something, but things happen for a reason. It might've been just too soon. And so I because I write full time, I dedicated 3 years to the book idea. When that book idea did not materialize, I shelved it and completely didn't think about it. I couldn't find the full-time journalism job, so I moved into academia full-time, but on the administrative side. And I became an academic advisor for the City College of New York, which is part of the CUNY system, and I would adjunct. So I was an adjunct for almost 20 years before I ended up taking a full-time teaching position 3 years ago. And this year I'll obtain tenure. I'm kind of in the process now, kind of going through the motions. So hopefully that'll go through by the end of summer. But I never gave up on journalism. I just shifted from journalism being my full-time focus to being a part-time focus. And of course, life took me in different directions as well. I decided that I wanted a family, and I'm a mom of 3 daughters. And so that also played a part in that. And then as life would turn out, about 2008, and I would always share my ideas and dreams with my students. And they were always saying, well, Professor, you sound like you're retired. You need to give the book another shot. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe, maybe. And I just didn't know how to do it. And one day I get a phone call from a friend of mine who wanted to interview me for a book chapter she was working on. And that kind of sparked the idea again. And then this thing called Facebook becomes like a big deal amongst my circle. And I see one of my former editors that I freelance for say that now she was a book scout and she was looking for pop culture ideas. And so I hit her up, and literally the book that took years for me to try to get a book deal in a matter of months became a reality. And that book ended up coming out in 2012. And that book was called Freestyling: How Hip Hop Changed the Fashion Industry. It really was a culmination of all the different people that I had met in the stories and kind of piecing it together as to how this $58 billion industry came about. And I approached the book in a way as if I was going to teach a class, and talked about it in a very overview way, looking at the relationship between fashion and music and youth, and then specifically honing in. It's really a New York story too, about New York in the time when hip hop was birthed, what was going on socially, in context wise, the role that fashion had played, and kind of how it happened, and the brands that took place, and the changes of retail. And I give different case studies along the way. And so that to me was a way of me also paying homage to the very people that helped build my journalistic career. I didn't make a whole lot of money. I got an academic publishing gig. And if anyone knows about academic publishing, they don't really pay. It's not a moneymaker, but it was a wonderful body of literature to finally put out the story. A story that up until then had really only been pieced in different places, in magazines here or there, maybe a chapter, but not in its entirety. So I'm very proud of that body of work, because that work kind of now kicks in what I'm doing now. And currently, I'm working on a second book that I'm co-editing, and it's called Fresh, Fly, and Fabulous: 50 Years of Hip Hop Style. It's an anthology, and I've been able to hire 10 of the people I've either are friends and I most admire, or scholars that I admire, to help tell different parts of this story. And simultaneously, I'm helping build a hip hop archive, a permanent archive at the Museum of FIT. And I'm curating or co-curating an exhibition with the same title. So again, it's an extension of that body of work that I've had. And then talk about, when things are meant for you, it's not one straight and narrow path. I break into the TV business 3.5 years ago. I had completely given up on television. I made my career in print, both in newspaper and magazine. And I got a phone call from a producer who was creating this new show. She had gotten my name from a professor, another CUNY colleague who knew me and of my work, and asked if I would come in and do a test, and I did, and we're going on season 4 in September. In fact, our show airs tonight at 8:30, so I'll make sure to send everyone a link. And what I'd like to do, if you would allow me, I can share my story that ran last month. The show is called LATINAS, and we air the second Tuesday of every month at 8:30. And we tell stories about ordinary women and extraordinary women. And this particular segment that I did last month is around an event planner. And she was on a TV show, a little TV show with Martha Stewart called Table Wars. That was her first television appearance. So I can share that link really quickly, and then I'll take questions. I think at that point, you've heard more than enough of my background. I've been very lucky to have worked in just about every aspect of media. And from time to time, I also do online reporting for a website called Remezcla. I do both TV and, let me give me 1 second here. TV and film reviews for that. So my beats are wide. I love culture. I love fashion. All right, I found it. I'm gonna add it to the chat so you have it as a reference. And I'm going to share my screen. Don't judge me. I've got a lot of stuff on the laptop, a lot of stuff. And nope, that's from one of my classes. We're not going to show that. Let's see. So this link will get you every back episode if you are that interested in. This is actually Yaz Quiles, who I interviewed. I'll just play the intro and run right into the show.
On this episode of Latinas, we celebrate Women's History Month, learn about how some Latinas got their start in the military, talk about our rizos and how to love them, and so much more. Latinas starts now. Welcome to Latinas, the show that's all about nuestras mujeres in the Latinx community. I'm Tina Beth Pina.
All right, so now I'm just gonna fast forward. Okay, found it. So I am a correspondent and producer, so I produce my own segments. And so this is a story that I pitched. I do write the intro for the host, who's also the creator of the show. And it'll be right after this. All right.
From competing in HGTV's special event design competition series Table Wars to celebrating one-of-a-kind celebrations for people nationwide, Afro-Latina event producer Yaz Quiles is the go-to curator for all things fabuloso. Correspondent Elena Romero is about to tell us why Yaz is today's Latina on the rise.
Yaz Quiles sure knows how to throw a party. The 44-year-old New Jersey-based celebrity event producer is the founder and CEO of Pop by Yaz, the experiential and creative agency responsible for creating some of the most luxurious and memorable event experiences for both celebrities and corporate clients alike.
A lot of clients were looking for my point of view. I realized that while I was at the table, I was one of very few, right? And so what that means is if I was at a table with a lot of men and we were doing a promotion for women, I'm like, how am I the only woman at this table? Or how am I the only Latina at this table? How am I the only Black woman at this table?
Quiles has had a wide range of clients over her 20-year event producing career.
I've had the pleasure of working with so many incredible and legendary people like CeCe Sabathia of the Yankees. I have T.I., Robin Thicke, Usher, my God, Juanes, Pedro Capó, like when I tell you the list goes on and on and on, it's been an incredible journey.
The Puerto Rican and Dominican entrepreneur and event curator, who recently starred in HGTV's Table Wars, says her design interests and creativity were sparked by her mother at a very young age.
I feel like I learned the world of entertaining from my mom, because entertaining was really how she showcased her love. You know, it's through nurturing and making food. And it's something that I hold near and dear to my heart. You know, for me, it's all about, you know, having a connection through all these mediums. I didn't realize at the time, but all the things that I was learning in my youth are things that really helped me in the world that I'm living now.
Quiles, a Bronx native, is a one-woman operation who works with a team of vendors to realize her vision. How do you make an event pop?
For me, it's all about the details, and it's also about creating that human connection. I want to create an engaging experience that really like touches your soul in a way that, you know, just really resonates with who the client is. It's what's the story that you want to convey and what you want people to leave here with. And then beyond that, after they leave, how do they continue that conversation?
Quiles recently produced her own intimate wedding extravaganza at her New Jersey home. Her 10-year love story to husband Neville Shorter was featured in the New York Times and Brides magazine. How could you plan your own wedding? Was that by far the hardest event to plan?
It was easy because it was our story. Literally 3 weeks before our 10-year anniversary, I just started putting together, you know, all the details. There was only 7 of us all together. His best friend was our officiant. You know, when it comes to the menu, we brought in like a Haitian chef, and she created a 5-course menu that told the story of our 10 years. Everything from like one of the dishes being a replica of one of the dishes that we had on our first date.
Quiles is currently working on launching a lifestyle brand this year, similar to that of entertainment guru Martha Stewart. Except Quiles wants hers to reflect her Latinx roots, identity, and community.
One of the next steps that we're going to do is to start working on, you know, lifestyle products. You know, I really want to be able to bring, you know, myself and what I bring to the world, you know, into your home. So if that means that we have like a candela or something that just feels like us, or maybe it's like a little potpourri that we make that's fresh, you know, these are things that are intrinsic to our household, because I feel like just we're not represented in that way. And then we do things that are beautiful to us in our homes, you know, and I want to make sure that that comes to life.
For Latinas, I'm Elena Romero. So I'll stop there and I'll take questions. I'm more than happy to do more show and tell, but I figured let's use the time wisely. So any burning question you may have, shoot, I'm more than happy to answer.
Hi, Elena.
Hi.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and to share your story. I really appreciate it. My question for you, I know this applies to all of journalism, but fashion journalism and culture journalism especially, it's all about the connections, and it's all about kind of establishing yourself and getting people to trust you and getting into that world. What would be your advice to start making those connections, especially in a big city like New York?
Great question. Well, I will tell you, I wasn't one that had fashion connections, right? So, you know, before you even think of the specialty of fashion journalism, you've got to make sure that you understand journalism overall, right? All the techniques that you use will be applicable in fashion journalism. It's a specialty beat, yes. So depending on the areas that you're interested in, you've got to learn everything that you can. In my case, my educational experience was crossing the street. At the time, my office was at 7 West 34th Street, and across the street meant walking over to Macy's and looking at the areas that I was responsible for covering and walking the floor, paying attention to the brands that were there, how they were merchandised. And then I literally picked up the phone, and if I didn't have the contacts, I made them and went on market appointments. And little by little, that was how I was able to develop those relationships. The trust that all goes back to your rapport with people and how you engage in conversation. And I think a lot of it has to do with, how open and honest are you with what you're trying to do. If you don't know something, say you don't know. You want to learn from them. It's almost like the same approach that I think I take in teaching. I have a very student-centered approach. I don't teach from top down. I'm not the professor and you're the student. I'm kind of looking at it in the same way. And so even though I was in a position of authority, when I would speak to people in the industry, tell me what I need to know about your brand. And in that sense, you're making them feel honored and respected and valued, right? So why wouldn't they want to open up to you? And when they couldn't tell me something, they told me, all right? Believe it or not, publicists were, a really key component of that. I know a lot of times we get a bad rap, we're kind of like oil and vinegar because the publicist has an agenda, right? They have a spin and they always have to maintain a positive image about their client. But a great publicist is going to tell you when they can't tell you something and is not going to lead you down the rabbit hole. So a lot of the things that, if you're coming in with no relationships, do what you can to learn. In my case, it was just getting onto the pavement and writing those stories and making those appointments. And in that case, it was an all around thing. It was going out to lunch. It was going to parties. It was going to trade shows. It was a process. It didn't happen overnight. And I wrote, in addition to covering the fashion markets, a great training ground was also, I wrote obituaries. That's something that many people don't do anymore, but at the trade, that was something that was important, and it was a wonderful way. I mean, if you could celebrate someone's life without interviewing them, imagine what you can do when you have access, right? So I also covered the party page, which I used to crack jokes and said I wrote about live dead people, so you had to really pay attention and listen. And even when your recorder's off, you're always on, right? So being very observant, paying attention, being willing to learn. Now, in some cases, it might mean that maybe you want to take a non-credited class or enroll in a class. Maybe you want to learn more of the technical aspects of fashion. So for me, my learning ground was just hitting the pavement and running. So be open, be open to learn. And that's really the key for everything in life. You're never going to stop learning. I mean, I just started doing my PhD 3 years ago. I've been out of school for a very long time. And so I think the key is to continually to build yourself, build your craft, build your tools. What's in your toolbox? What could you say makes you different than someone else in that space? And so what makes you you and your unique attributes and your personal narrative is included in that as too, because how you view the news has a lot to do with how you view life. And so just continue to learn and pay attention to who you are and be passionate, right? I don't think yet I've written a story that I just wasn't interested in. I've had that pleasure that every story that I wrote, I took that care. I think journalists, we take so easily for granted that if we have a microphone or a pen or a paper, and because I'm asking someone a question that they're supposed to spill out, all their secrets and tell me everything, that's a certain level of trust with a stranger that should be honored and celebrated, right? And that's where the framing of questions becomes really, really important. If you're doing a story about someone who just had their son murdered, how you approach the story, how you frame your questions is extremely important, right? Where you're not being intrusive in a time and place where that family is extremely vulnerable. So it's paying attention to the surroundings, it's doing your homework. The worst thing that can happen is not being prepared for an interview or for a story. Now, don't get me wrong. Life isn't perfect where you're going to have plenty of lead time to go run out and do a story. If you're doing a magazine story, sure. If you're working on a daily newspaper, sometimes just like today, if you were a reporter on the beat where this shooting took place, there is no time to prep, right? And you have to know how to move in a particular environment that may not be safe. So again, I think it's just absorbing as much as you can and learning from your mistakes. There is nothing wrong with not knowing or making a mistake. It only means that you're going to be that much better when you move forward.
Thank you, Elena.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead, Raphael.
Hi, my name is Raphael. Thank you for speaking with us today. My question is actually really similar to Justin's question, but instead of the fashion industry, I was planning on asking you what advice would you give to people who are interested in joining the publishing business? Because I know that you spoke a little bit how it took you
Sure.
10 years and Facebook had a role in that,
Sure.
but I wanted to hear more on that.
So I need some more specificity from you. When you say you want to join the publishing business, in what
Okay.
aspect?
I mean, as an author, like someone who would actually publish a book.
Okay, so author, that's a whole different world. There's a couple of ways that you can approach it. Are you looking to do fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the advice for fiction, but I'll also speak overview in case people want to do nonfiction. So the general rule of thumb for nonfiction work is that you need to complete the manuscript in order for you to get a book deal. If you're working in nonfiction, then you need a book proposal and a sample chapter or two, and that will be sufficient for you to get a book deal. Now, there are very many different ways to get a book deal. You can go the traditional route and look for an agent, and there are agents who take on new clients, but getting a relationship with an agent is almost like a courtship. Sometimes you end in marriage, and sometimes you end in marriage and then end in divorce, right? And sometimes it's just a courtship and you move on and you get dating someone else. So it's finding the right partnership. An agent is responsible for basically shopping your deal. It's very unusual for authors to do that shopping themselves. The way the business operates, the agent is the middle person between the author and the publisher. And there's reasons for that. The publisher wants, a well-written manuscript. They know that the agent understands the business. The writer, especially a first-time writer, may only understand the specific role of writing and not everything that comes with it. And so in that sense, the agent kind of helps guide the writer through the process and journey. In terms of finding an agent, well, when I looked for an agent, back then they had hard copy books you could just literally get a directory, and they would have hundreds upon hundreds by state. Now I'm sure it's an online resource of agents that would give blurbs and talk about the areas that they would get authors from, if they would take on new authors, what their requirements would be. The general rule of thumb is that if and when you find agents that you may want to consider to represent you, you're going to write a pitch letter. And that pitch letter is basically like a cover letter, sharing, who you are and what your idea is. You provide, if it's fiction, you provide the actual manuscript. You'll provide a self-addressed stamped envelope and expect many rejections. Those who would be interested in you will call you. And that's if you go the traditional route, agent, right? Then there's the non-agent route. That's usually for people who have already some existing publishing relationships. And then there's also the area, which is a fairly more interesting realm, the idea of what we call self-publishing. And there are opportunities where you can self-publish with arms, for example, like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and some of the traditional retail outlets, where they can guide you. There'll be some sort of business contractual agreement where they understand publishing. Or if you don't and you do it on yourself, then you have to then look for someone to publish your book and take on the expense. But the benefits of self-publishing is that you get all the royalties yourself, right? What you spend in terms of the cost of making the book, the profits are all yours. The reason why many people go with a traditional book route is because the publishing companies have established relationships with retailers, with trade shows. So in terms of getting the book sold, that's where that comes in. So I would, say explore all avenues. Try to see if you find an agent that works specifically with your kind of genre of book. Have you written the book already, or if it's an idea stage?
No, I actually wrote the book.
Okay,
but yes, I already have the manuscripts done, but
So you're right there ready to pitch. If the manuscript is done, then you pitch. And you're going to get feedback. Some people won't get feedback. Some people will. And you keep trying. I mean, I must have sent out like 100. I did direct mail. And so I must have sent out like 100 queries before I got like 10 or 12 callbacks. And then I ended up settling on agents. Ironically, over the course of my career, I went through 3 agents. We didn't work out, and I ended up getting my deal myself. So I haven't necessarily locked into an agent yet. Thankfully, I haven't needed to, but it's definitely something that I'll be doing in the future. So you already have your manuscript, really polish it to the best of your ability and shop it around and see what happens.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I had a question. So I know we've spoken about this before. For if everyone doesn't know, I was doing freelance work, and then at the last second, when I was getting my last interview, the editor like left the publication and they didn't want the story anymore. But Elena really encouraged me to stay in contact with that editor, even though he was moving on. So what would you recommend for trying to keep networking and making those relationships, even if, it didn't end on a good note, and like keeping your reputation, alive?
I will tell you that for anyone who works in media, regardless of the area of specialty, the key is always to keep a good rapport and relationships with people. Networking in my day, we would have a thing called a Rolodex, and we would collect business cards. Well, we've moved probably quite a bit from that, but networking goes beyond the business card. You can have an email address and phone number, but if you don't use it, then you don't have a relationship. And that's something that you build over time. You might not be able to cash in on that relationship for 10, 15 years. I mean, the relationship building starts right now, exactly where you are. Building with your professor, building with your classmates. You don't know who's in your space and who's going to be where, and they're going to remember you for all kinds of reasons, and they're going to pick up the phone and call you and give you a gig. And if you've had a good working relationship with someone, it doesn't matter how far along it is, they'll remember that. All right. So, even if, let's say, you worked with an editor and the editor is no longer there, well, that shouldn't kill your relationship. Editors move around from publication to publications as journalists do. Sometimes journalists become publicists. Sometimes publicists become journalists. So you don't really want to burn bridges, because especially in our field, every relationship matters, because it could get us one step closer to whatever that truth of that story is going to be. So keep that contact, stay in contact with them, even if it's dropping them a line. Hey, how are you? Where are you at? Because, today someone is doing one job. Next thing you know, they're an editor-in-chief somewhere, and they'll remember you because you stayed in touch. Oh, I can't hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Elena. My name is Nicole, and I really loved your stories of like all these projects that you've done in the past. It seems like you've really kind of dipped your toe into a lot of different areas, and you've done a lot of cool things. And I'm a really curious person, and I feel like I have interests across the board, across industries. And when it comes to approaching a new project, especially a big project, what steps do you really take to not only have the confidence going into that new project, but also to get organized? And who do you reach out to? And what is your process when it comes to approaching a new project that you're really passionate about?
So you have a number of questions there. I'm going to try to address them in various different ways. One of the things that I think all of you should think about is creating your own vision board. What is it exactly that you see yourself doing? And over what period of time, right? This is where you kind of outline your short-term and your long-term goals. In terms of confidence, I wish I could tell you that when I was an undergrad student that I had all the confidence in the world. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I was extremely shy. And if someone would have told me that now I would be giving speeches at 800 and 1,000 seat, audiences, I would have thought they were crazy back then. So to be able to combat my fear, I faced it face on. And I think that's, for me, journalism was the best thing for me, because somehow when I was a journalist, I was a superhero. It was when I was to put on my cape and all of a sudden, I wasn't scared anymore because I had to get the story. There's no not getting the story. Once it's assigned to you, you have to make the deadline. So I think the first thing is outline, what is it that you see yourself doing? And it's okay to have multiple interests. I will tell you, the baby boomer generation told Gen X that we were supposed to just do this one thing. And I'm clearly now in my second to third career. So I'm here to tell you that yes, it can be done, but it happens in various stages of life. It's not going to happen all at once. I don't know what the starting salary is right now, but when I graduated journalism school, and I went to NYU, and yeah, a lot of debt, and it was a great journalism school at the time. My first journalism job in 1996 was $25,000. I don't think the meter mark has moved that much. A dear friend of mine who I admire very much, Terry Agins, who worked as a fashion reporter at the Wall Street Journal, told me that her first job at DNR at Fairchild, the same publication that I was at some years prior, was $17,000. Why am I bringing that up? Please don't think that money is going to be your motivation into breaking into this business. Is there money to be made? Absolutely. But it's only going to come with time and experience. And it's also going to mean that more than likely, it's not going to be you working at one job for 25 years and then you retire. Especially in this business, it's too many factors. I would have never seen the internet and online publishing coming, right? And the impact that that would have on the business and news gathering, right? So one of the things that I would recommend, if you can, while you're still in journalism school, is really think about it from a multifaceted point of view. Some of the regrets that I had, I was very linear and focused in television. I should have taken a print class. I should have taken a public relations class. I should have taken some engineering courses, right? I wish I would have understood graphic design. Now, all of these things I've had experience with to some form or another. And to be honest, a lot of the work, depending on where you get your job, may be union related. So you're only able to do one thing. But you want to be able to understand each of those specific areas that relate to your story. Why? Because then you know what can and can't be done. So even if you want to be a reporter, let's say you want to do television, then understand what a producer does, understand what an editor does, because that will only make you a better reporter. I started producing about a year after I did reporting, and it tremendously improved my writing in terms of my script. Why? Because when I sat in the producer's seat, I saw things very differently than when I was looking at it from a reporter point of view. So that vision board as to who you want to be and that trajectory is going to take some planning, and understand with every strategic plan, there's always an evaluation and some tweaks that you're going to need to do along the way. So that takes care of the big picture. Now we look at the more, intimate picture. So the other thing that I want to give you advice of is that no one is ever going to believe in you more than you. This is a tough business where you're always going to be critiqued. Someone is always going to have better grammar, sentence structure, and maybe even outscoop you. But if this is something that you really want and feel it in your heart is your passion, then don't give up. So many times in my early career, I gave up because I wasn't ready or prepared for the rejection that comes in this business. So what? I couldn't find the job a couple months, a year into the job. I gave up and looked elsewhere. Eventually, I recentered and gave it a shot, and then, it all worked out. But take every opportunity, even a missed one, as a way to get you one step closer to who you're supposed to be. And it's building blocks. So if you don't get your dream job now, focus on how then you can build yourself up to reapply for that job or a job that's very similar. Also, don't think for a minute that if you seem to have gotten a detour, that the experience that you get elsewhere is a waste of time. I'm a professor in the marketing communications department of FIT. I not only teach journalism, I teach market research, I teach advertising, I teach fashion journalism, magazine journalism, I teach PR, corporate communications. I teach about 12 different courses on rotation. I would not be able to do that had all of the different life experiences that I picked up in communication, both on the editorial and business, put me in place to be able to take this job. All right. So again, there's not a waste opportunity. Look at every job and every situation as a building block to getting you one step closer to what that reality should be. It's okay for you to get sidetracked. Sometimes it's, again, about timing and definitely about who you know, which goes back to that networking. The third thing that I would tell you is that try to develop some sort of mentorship, right? Find someone or an organization that you can latch onto. There are people who've done this before you. You are not reinventing the wheel. How did they get to where they were? What advice would they give you, right? And I will tell you, for me, in undergrad, I joined the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I joined the Society of Professional Journalists. I went to trade shows. I went to conferences. I did workshops. I didn't find a mentor until Fairchild Publications. And I had the mentor up until last year when she unfortunately passed. She's the one who actually pointed me into teaching at FIT, that very same mentor that I latched onto when I first joined Fairchild Publications. And she was at another publication and saw me being young and hungry and not knowing how to move in the business. And I was able to have those uncomfortable conversations with her that I couldn't necessarily have with some of my counterparts at the publication, all right? I mean, there are overt and subtle things that happen in terms of how we put stories together and how we may or may not be promoted. And so, you know, you need someone that you can bounce ideas off of that may help you in knowing which are the battles that you should go after and which are the ones you should sit out. Every single, you know, situation that may come up with your editor may not be the moment for you to take on that fight. And thankfully, it's those fights that I did take on did work out for me. So in terms of the projects, be realistic, right? Are you, you know, when we pitch stories, it's twofold. You're pitching the story idea, and then are you the right person to write the story? And sometimes, you know, we have to kind of remove our ego from it. But when you're pitching, you have to pitch it in that way. Not only your idea, but that you're the right person for the job. Because very rarely, and it does happen, they might love your idea, but they don't think you're the person that should write it. And, you know, then there's the ethical issue of whether they give that idea to someone else or they just ignore you. So think about finding a mentor, someone that you admire. And even if it's not someone who's agreed to be your mentor, do informationals. You know, if they're people that you admire or want to meet, how do you meet them? You send them an email, you pick up the phone, you go to a talk where they're talking and you connect. It doesn't mean that you're going to contact them every day, right? You might send them an email, you might send them a letter, you might send them a holiday card. You know, you let them know from time to time what you're doing. And that's how you develop a relationship. That is true networking. So you need to build yourself in a lot of different ways. You're in school, you're getting the best technical training right now. You have the ability to learn everything that you can from your professor and the professors that you're taking courses with. You have the ability to publish. You have the ability to report. Get out there and do stories, as many as you can. And then go outside the school space. Start freelancing. If you can't freelance, create a blog. Constantly work on your craft. Never stop learning. And then, like I said, find mentors, graduates that have already done the program who are out in the business, alums that you can reach out to. You have them in your circle, you just may not realize it. And then aim high. Maybe there's someone that you really admire and you shoot them an email. There'll be some that won't answer, but most of us, of course, are flattered that someone wants to talk to us, because of course we want to extend the hand and get as many of you in the business. Maybe you can get farther than I did, because everyone at some point does kind of hit a plateau, and you can probably go much further than I could have ever at a younger age and time. I'm almost 50 at this point. I can just put a checklist. I did TV, been there, done that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If nobody else has any more questions, I know Elena's very busy and we're almost out of time anyway, but if anyone
I've got a few more minutes. I teach at 8 o'clock to China, but I got a few more minutes before I switch and put on the professor hat myself. If you can, shameless plug, watch Latinas on CUNY-TV at 8:30 p.m. Depending on your cable provider, the channels will vary, but if you wait about 15 minutes or so after airtime, it should be live on YouTube and you can watch the show if you don't get a chance to watch it live.
I'll ask one more question.
Sure.
Earlier you mentioned being pigeonholed because at like one of your first publications because you're Latina or you're a woman or because you're young. So how do you avoid that? Like, what advice would you give to kind of prove that you can go beyond certain?
I would be lying if I told you that you're not going to face certain obstacles, that you're not going to be pigeonholed, that you're not always going to be accepted, right? That you're not always going to be paid what you're worth. All of these things come with life. I think a lot of it comes with how you deal with it. And it goes back to that confidence that I mentioned before. No one will ever believe in you more than you. So I think it's dependent on time, place, and manner and what the situation is. I will say, one of the best things that I could advise is never do anything that compromises your integrity or your morals. All right. At the point that someone makes you feel less than, it's not for you. And learn that it's okay to walk away, that there are always going to be an opportunity. There is no job in the world that is worth you compromising who you are and what you believe in. And so I think at that moment in time, when you're placed with your back against the wall and someone is going to test you, and trust me, in this business, you will have many tests, not just from getting the story. It's not, you may not be covering dangerous beats, but, nonetheless, you might go through all kinds of experiences. You might have someone, we could be followed, we could be sued. We have to constantly dot our I's and cross our T's. Our interactions with our colleagues, people become jealous because of what the stories that you're breaking. It could be petty stuff. It could be really big stuff. But I think you as an individual need to be really strong, because once you're out in the industry, the rude awakening comes in. I wish I could say that as much as I try to inform my students about what that real world looks like, there's no better training than to be in those situations. And you're going to be tested. And I think at that point, how you handle it with grace, with your head up high, is the only way that I could recommend. You're going to go through those bumps and bruises, but again, no one could take away what's meant for you.
I guess we're just about out of time, and people are starting to drop off and go to their 7 o'clock engagements of one sort or another. This has been so wonderful. Thank you, Amaya, for getting us rolling with this and for bringing such a dynamic and positive and experienced speaker. Just been great. Really enjoyed it. Got more to say, but I'll make
me. And I'll share information with all of you. If you are interested, the exhibition that I'm co-curating will drop February 8th of 2023, and the book will come out the day before. So it's going to be a free, open to the public. The exhibition will be on display till April 23rd, and we will have a one-day symposium around it. So I'll share that information, and if students are interested, all they have to do is RSVP, and they can learn more about that subject.
Thank you. And if you want to keep me on your distribution list, I will make sure everybody gets it.
Absolutely. So. I'll make sure to do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was really fantastic. Just really inspiring. Thank you.
And Amaya, I'm going to have you can share my email address with all the students.
Okay.
And, feel free to contact me. Social media, I know young people are on social media. I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I know most of you probably don't use Facebook. Instagram, my handle is Prof. E. Romero. And my Twitter handle is free_styling with no G. That's the name of my first book. And I'm more than happy to accept you all.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks to everybody for coming.
All right.
Right.
Take care. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
You.
Professor, oh, both of you are here. Wait, I have to tell you
Oh,
something.
you need me to stay? Okay, sure.
I'll tell you, I got good news today that I got accepted to the Newmark graduate program.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, that's
Both of you guys are really
fantastic.
part of my decision to like apply there and get in. So yeah, I wanted to tell you guys that today.
Oh, that's wonderful. We'll have to celebrate.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Elena, you mentioned Rose Arce. I worked with her at Newsday.
Oh my goodness.
Way back.
So I worked with her, it would have been like 94.
Yeah, I left Newsday in 93.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even mention I worked at the Post as a freelance editor from like 2003 to 2005 under Sandra Guzman. We did a supplement called Tempo there.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And then the Daily News was, we were neck and neck at like 650 circulation. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've worked in pretty much every aspect of media.
A real New York media story.
Oh yeah, I mean, usually we stick to like one medium. I've done it all at this point.
Sure have.
And I really enjoyed teaching and
on your
telling students, you want to do this? Knock yourself out. I mean, to think we were doing journalism before the internet, when we had to really look hard to find the source. Oh my God, to get a celebrity PR person contact. I mean, everything is at your fingertips now. It's so much easier. I can read a teleprompter on an iPad. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the technology. They don't realize how lucky they really are in doing this job with technology on their side.
It's so much easier. I mean, I
remember do everything with our cell phone in 4K, in high quality definition.
Typewriters, Elena. I'm a little.
Oh my! I had the ones that you had to press really hard. Yeah, before there was spell check
paper
and whiting out all the time. Manuscripts. Oh, I mean, it's unbelievable. Floppy disks. They were like, "What's a floppy disk?" I teach mass comm, and I almost feel really. Oh, I go through music and radio and TV, and I'm like, oh my goodness. You were born with the internet. I mean, the internet totally changed our lives and how we communicate and share media. And, they think everything is in 150 characters or less. And everybody does citizen journalism. People, there was a shootout, people are making videos. It was just very interesting, but yeah, I wouldn't change it for a bit. I love the job. And I'm fortunate enough, I tell stories about people and culture. I'm not writing about wars. It would be a different kind of beat, but I write
in hard news. You started out,
and I mean, I still do. I mean, I purposely, I'm the only reporter at the show. It's basically my editor and myself, and then other people contribute that already work at the station. But in terms of specifically working on the show, and my editor has much more of a entertainment, human interest beat. I'm a hard news person. So, 1 minute I'm doing a story about a woman who has stage 4 breast cancer. I've shared my own story about arthritis. I've done health stories. I've done climate change stories. I've done fashion stories. So I do education stories. I've done stories about COVID and why the Latino population is, vaccine hesitant. And so I try to I alternate. So, this month and next month, the story now I didn't mention is about a pet designer. She makes animal gowns for rats, chickens, pigs, dogs, but she's also a philanthropist and she raises over $1 million for homeless people. I mean, really fascinating woman. In TV, we don't have room to tell all that color. I couldn't say also that she was a pet mom and all her dogs are actors, and there was just not enough time. I focused on one thing. But then I'm doing a story that's running in May on a indigenous doula. So, and midwife. So the story changes every month. And I think that's what makes it so much fun that, I'm starting over every time I'm doing a new story and challenging myself to not stay conformed into a box, right? Because I think it's so easy that once you know how to do this job, oh, everybody, you know, I can tell my students, everybody can do the 5 W's. We could teach you the format, you plug in the data, but what's going to make your story different is how you address the larger angles. It's your perspective and how you view this story, right? It's really how empathetic you are and where you're going. And so, you know, for me, it's, you know, these are people that normally mainstream media, for me, I always like to write about the underdog or those stories that don't get really told in commercial television. And their stories are equally just as valid. I mean, this woman, you know, bills a couple $100,000 to do these wow events for like Netflix and, you know, and all these major corporations. She happened to do a TV show recently, but she wasn't a big news, but she's someone who's up and coming, right? The pet design person, she went viral when she made doggy gowns for the Oscars. She happened to also go to FIT for a pet design program we no longer do that we should relaunch. You know, so I'm constantly talking to people, meeting people in all kind of places. I'm always looking for the story and hopefully, you know, leaving some sort of legacy and telling someone's story and, you know, moving right along, right? So that's kind of what I like to do. So, you know, human interest stories, but yeah, I still like hard news. I miss the chase. Yeah. I miss someone giving me that, you know, you don't want me to find out, I'll dig deeper. You know, it's that adrenaline rush. You're under deadline, you're under pressure. The more you try to block me, I'm gonna get the story, you know, and hopefully in some cases, you know, get justice depending on the story that we're talking about.
Well, I think it's the joy that you find, and I mean, it just comes through. Joy, how much joy you find in all this. It's really the most inspiring part of. And
the students, right? They have no idea. You know, I went to journalism school, and all they talked about was just the writing of the story. Nobody talked about the business. We need to talk about the business. You know, there wasn't enough time. You know, there were times where I was dealing with the ad exec. I'm like, why are you calling to talk to me? Shouldn't my boss be talking to you? Oh, you're trying to muscle me into writing a story. I didn't understand, because in journalism school, they talked about separation of church and state. And that was sort of true, sort of, you know? So, you know, those are the kind of things I talk a lot about ethics because, you know, that's something I don't think we talk enough of, and different people view ethics differently and what's acceptable and what's not. So, you know, I tell them there's no real right or wrong answers, but, you know, whatever it is, you still got to deal with the consequences, whether you're the boss or you're the one in the hot seat. So do what makes you able to sleep at night, and whatever you can deal with, whatever consequences come your way. And that's, you know, that's it.
Well, I want to say thanks again. I got to let you go. And Amaya, thank you. And congratulations again to you for this great news. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Stay in touch. I'm more than happy to, you know, talk anytime you need me.
That's just great. Thank you, Elena.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.